This
Well, good morning,
conference will now be recorded.
good morning, everyone. So we have a tight schedule, as you can see. So I'm going to make this request right now. If you have updates or have items for discussion, please email them to Blake, and he will compile them into a digest message for that. Because we also have a tight schedule, I'm going to hold all the speakers to maximum 30 minutes of their time. I will use the chat function, which hopefully you can see when you're presenting, where I will give an update of like 15, 10, 5, and 1. And then at the 30-minute mark, I will just rudely pop in, just so that we can fit everybody in before noon. So with that being said, I think we do have an exciting program today. So Blake, you have any updates?
Yep, so just wanted to do some quick updates. We do have our Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. Proposals are now being accepted, and so these are grants for up to 3 years for projects that implement our water quality, habitat restoration, applied research, and education priorities. Those projects can range from 25,000 up to about 250,000 for that entire 3-year period. The deadline for that is March 13th. So check out if you're interested in it. Jessica has just posted a link to the TBERF proposal in the chat, and feel free to reach out if that is something of interest to you. Also, just to let you know, we have convened our first working group for the Tampa Bay Community Survey. I think we've got 6 to 8 or so members of the Social Science Subcommittee that are part of that working group. We've met once. Basically, what we'll be doing now is I'll be putting a draft together of this community survey this next month, and then I'll send it out to the members of the working group to get feedback. And after a long approval process that we have to do to get this approved from the EPA, we're hoping to be able to launch the survey around October of 2024. So if you are still interested in joining this working group and contributing to the survey questions and things like that, feel free to reach out to me in the next week or two. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I'll take it from there.
All right. Well, next on the schedule is Jessica Lewis. She's going to tell us about the Manatee Awareness Coalition Outreach Project.
Hey, y'all. Blake, can you make me a presenter, please?
Yes.
And while we're pulling that up, I'll introduce myself. Jessica Lewis, she or they pronouns. I am the staff liaison for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the Manatee Awareness Coalition. I've also got a couple of co-presenters, Linka and Beth, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Hello, Lenka Kaneshka, she, her. I am a public interest communicator with University of Florida and strategic planning consultant and member of the Manatee Awareness Coalition. Excited to present with you today.
And Beth, if you're there, I can no longer see y'all, so I'm not sure. Maybe she's running late. That's okay. We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for having us. Appreciate y'all giving us some time on your busy schedule today. I'm going to give you a little background first and then talk about the project that we're interested in. So the Manatee Awareness Coalition is a Tampa Bay focused organization that has been around since the 90s. It's been a little bit inactive for a while, but we're getting it sort of kick-started back up. It's a group of government officials. We've got researchers, we've got advocacy organizations, boating interests, utility companies, all kinds of people engaged with this organization. Some of our current active members are Save the Manatee Club, the National Wildlife Foundation, county staff, universities, consultants, and I think maybe that's all the background I want to give to you, but I want to give you a little context. The reason we've been more active in recent months is to hopefully prevent a mortality event like the one that we're seeing in Indian River Lagoon that started in 2021. Since 2021, 1,500 manatees have died due to starvation. And for context, there are only 8,000 manatees in the entire state of Florida. So while starvation is not a major issue here in Tampa Bay, we want to ensure that it does not become an issue. And Beth, are you here yet? Nope, that's okay. All right, so a little background on manatees. They are herbivores. They eat submerged aquatic vegetation like seagrass and macroalgae. They have a really low thermal tolerance, meaning that they need warm water to survive. They can undergo cold stress very easily. We see them all the way from Alabama to South Carolina, but we're talking about Florida here today. So until the major starvation event that got kickstarted in 2021, boat strikes were the #1 cause of manatee deaths in Florida, and boat strikes continue to be the #1 cause of manatee deaths here in Tampa Bay. Documented deaths are between something like 15 and 34%, and some carcasses aren't necropsied because we already know what the cause of death is. Starvation is another major issue that predominantly affects the east coast of Florida at this time. If you're not familiar, the Indian River Lagoon is on the east coast, Tampa Bay, we're here on the west coast. Cold stress is another major problem due to habitat loss and development in the state of Florida. There aren't as many calm, shallow, safe areas where manatees can congregate in relatively warm water during the winter, like they need to stay safe from the cold. Red tide is another major problem that we see here on the Gulf Coast. And just glance at some of the manatee mortalities there at the bottom, you can see that we had that huge uptick in 2021 and another big year in 2022. The 2023 number is only a partial year of research there. So Manatee Awareness Coalition partners, or MAC, we've done the research to understand the issues that impact manatee populations and health, and we're going to briefly tell you about some of the most important factors that are really intertwined, so they're not like separate, distinct issues. They really all sort of come together. We've seen a significant dip in seagrass losses since 2016. An excess of nutrients flow into the bay from rain-filled fertilizer runoff from our yards and from agriculture, from leaking septic systems and from aging wastewater systems that are both unintentionally releasing untreated wastewater into the bay, and some are simply just not being treated to the level that it could be for more intentional releases into the bay that are allowed by law. All of these nutrients then feed harmful algal blooms like the one you see in this photo here. This recurring algae bloom that happens in the upper area in Tampa Bay, this bloom is called Pyridinium bohemens, or pyro for short, or brown tide, some people call it. These large-scale repetitive blooms create dense shade in the water, and they prevent seagrass from photosynthesizing. When they can't photosynthesize, the seagrass health degrades and they eventually die out. Seagrass are the main food of manatees. They are what they want to eat. They provide the most nutrients. So while we haven't seen enough seagrass loss here in Tampa Bay to lead to manatee deaths yet, we have seen this exact same scenario lead to mass manatee starvation deaths in the Indian River Lagoon on the east coast of Florida. That estuary lost 75% of seagrass acreage since 2011. And you can see here on the slide, we've lost about 25% between 2016 and 2022. So we could see a similar sort of ecosystem collapse here in Tampa Bay, and that's what we're really concerned about. So we have multiple manatee protection zones in Tampa Bay. These are areas in the waterway in which boaters are required to reduce speed to avoid disturbing seagrass or hitting manatees while they graze on the seagrass while the manatees are resting or mating or whatever they're doing. There are many more seagrass meadows than are designated manatee protection zones or slowdown zones, but boaters are advised to slow down or raise their engines up to avoid operating a boat or avoid operating a boat in these areas altogether. So these zones are, in the photo that you see on the right, are legally required slowdown zones, but there's also guidelines to proactively slow down in other seagrass coverage areas. Some boats also have a head on board. Untreated sewage is not allowed to be discharged in inland or coastal waters, but enforcement is, pretty spotty. And the rules for treated sewage from boats being pumped out into inland or coastal waters is pretty complicated and maybe not super easy to follow, or pretty easy to not follow, if you get what I mean. In my opinion, whether or not a boat owner flushes sewage into Tampa Bay is sort of left up to the honor system because there's not a lot of checks on it. There is a designated service called a pump out that essentially acts as a contained discharge for sewage from boats, much like you would see for an RV, for example. You go to a specific area to discharge sewage waste. It's then treated by the municipality or the private entity, whoever it is. But you can see that nutrient pollution not only comes from our yards with the fertilizer, from agriculture, stormwater runoff, but it also can come directly from boats in the water as well. So all of these issues are a little bit intertwined, is what I'm trying to get at. And so we think these two audiences are the most relevant, given the issues that manatees face in Tampa Bay, and behavior changes in these demographics could likely have a beneficial effect on manatee health and populations. These two audiences are not set in stone. We're open to adjusting or refining these two audiences. Boaters, their impacts are literal. Manatee impacts from boat strikes, propeller scarring in seagrass meadows, reduces the food that's available to manatees. And I think I skipped over prop scarring, but that's essentially when a boat operates through a shallow seagrass coverage area and the propeller on that boat rips up the seagrass and literally just pulls it out of the ground. They also contribute to nutrient pollution via pump outs that lead to harmful algal blooms. For residents, people that live directly on the water or own property directly on the water throughout the Tampa Bay watershed, nutrient pollution from stormwater runoff is probably their major contribution to issues with manatees, but also they could be illegally feeding or providing fresh water to manatees. It is illegal to provide food or fresh water or really anything to manatees, and that is because it helps manatees become reliant on human interactions. It prevents them from migrating when it gets cold. It also puts them directly in harm's way with more human interactions like boats. If you're feeding a manatee off your dock, it gets very used to being at that dock. So as boats are operating in that area, it becomes essentially twice as dangerous. So the desired outputs from a project that we're considering are essentially these three things. We want to understand the knowledge and attitudes of recreational boaters and coastal residents. We also want to understand if they are complying with current regulations, legally required regulations, as well as best practices, like those guidelines that aren't legally required, but they should be practicing them. We also want recommendations for outreach tactics that effectively change behavior in these two audiences, and we would like to create replicable methods for additional studies moving forward. The framework that we think this project might take, and again, this is still in an idea phase, it has not moved forward beyond that at this point. We're thinking of doing some pre-outreach surveying of these two audiences, doing some sort of outreach tactic or tactics to reach them with educational campaign of some sort, and doing a post-outreach survey to those same audiences. From there, it'll be analysis and reporting. And Linka, if you want to go over the next couple slides.
Absolutely. Thank you. As I mentioned, my name is Lenka Konechka, and really excited to bring this back around to the purpose we're trying to present, which is ways that we're hoping this social science subcommittee can support this project. So public interest communications really is about combining communications and outreach with behavioral science and creating change in the public field. So while we're talking about all this amazing research that Jessica's provided, we really want to make sure we can correctly assess what the audience knows, where we need to go, so that when we build our outreach campaign, we're targeting it to those unmet needs and then able to assess whether or not we were able to increase knowledge and ultimately change behavior. So for the first audience that we identified, recreational boaters, in order for the campaign to be effective, we really want to understand them and where they are, where our baseline level of understanding and knowledge is. One of the things we've heard is that there's a lot of different guidance and regulation, and boaters sometimes don't even know what they are supposed to do. What might seem intuitive, a hungry or thirsty manatee, what to do in that instance might not actually be correct what you might think to do. It might make sense to feed them, but in your mind, it's actually harmful for them. Whether or not they're aware of some of the regulations like slow wake zones and the different boating or angling guides, how to operate their boat, what to do if you see an injured manatee. The first step is really understanding how much does the audience really know? And then the two questions at the bottom, if they do know, what is preventing the action and behavior? So really understanding the target audience and what's in the way of them changing their behavior. If we understand these things, then we can create an outreach campaign that's not just simple information, but can actually target behavior change. So being able to conduct a study like this with a social science component gives us data we can use to make the outreach more effective. On the next slide, we dive a little bit more into the coastal residents audience. So understanding the knowledge and behavior of some of our regions most close to the water audience can help mirror what residents might do when they encounter manatees. So if we're able to build our knowledge of what coastal residents are doing and what they're knowledgeable about and willing to do, again, helps us create more targeted campaigns that can help change behavior. So some of the questions we have around coastal residents are they aware of the proper behaviors? Being some of our, most environmentally close residents, are they aware of some of the dangers, some of the environmental hazards, and do they know what to do? Do they care about this issue? Are they concerned? Do they support funding of these issues? Kind of understanding their drives, motives, their ethics, so that when we create those communication campaigns, again, it's actually effective. Again, the last two questions are more of like helping us with data about what else they see, what they think should be a focus area, and if they're willing to be a part of the effort. So on the next couple of slides, I'm breaking it down a little bit more into what we need to get this accomplished and what we can provide as a coalition. So as it stands, we're able to launch some communications outreach without the ability to really analyze on the front and back end any knowledge transfer, knowledge gain, behavior change. So we're able to create and distribute communications without the ability to see if it made a big difference. So we're seeking social science, a social science researcher or somebody who has awareness and knowledge and experience in this area to help us structure this campaign. So if any of this resonated with you or someone that you know, here are the kinds of things we're looking for. Writing the actual scope of work and methods for the study, making recommendations and guidance based on knowledge of social science principles, assisting with grant applications and helping to analyze and package the data so that we can apply for those, leading research implementation with the staff and support of the committee, and then drafting and co-writing reports in order to present our data. On the next slide, we show what the committee is able to provide to this effort. Without the social science component, again, we're able to do outreach, but without the ability to see how effective it was. So we're able to provide all of the guidance on what we're looking for, how we want to proceed in order to come up with the outcomes we need, all of the manatee and ecology subject matter expertise. We're able to assist and help with grant applications, research, the communications effort. We have staff and intern time, possibly some funding. We have all of our existing outreach and educational projects that we've done. We have all our existing knowledge and research on what outreach has been helpful in the past. The committee includes people from many different manatee organizations that have done outreach and are aware of what practices are working. And then recommendations for reaching our target audiences. So we're really looking for a partnership where we have somebody that can help guide and lead the effort and work with our coalition. So I believe it's coming back now to Jessica on the next slide, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so that is the idea in a nutshell. That is what we wanted to bring to y'all and see if there's interest in contributing to this project and being a partner like Lenka was talking about. So if you are interested in that or you just want to learn more about it and maybe be a part of it, please go ahead and send us your contact information. You can put it in the chat or email us, whatever you prefer. And I believe we've got a poll for you as well. So that is the presentation. But if you want to talk about this, have some discussion, if you have questions, we're happy to take those down.
We have about 10 minutes for questions, so.
Jan, this is Krista. I put several things in the chat box that might be related or helpful to the effort, because there's a lot of efforts that are either already implemented and reports are out through Florida Sea Grant that have a lot of the same objectives. So this, behavior change related to stopping the seagrass scarring and use of the pump out stations. Do we need funds to have more pump out stations? And if we did, would people use them more? I think I can provide the contact information for the folks that are most integrated with those efforts if they're not obvious in the links that I shared there too.
Thank you, appreciate that.
I see David question in the chat. So David, do you want to just ask it?
Yeah, sure, go ahead, thanks. So I'm just wondering, well, thank you for the presentation. It was really very informative for me. I'm wondering if boat propeller guards protect manatees and seagrass, and if so, is that something that could be built in the messaging?
I only know about these like as a boater myself, so I don't know like how effective they are. The point of them is to protect wildlife and to reduce impacts on the environment. I'm not sure to what extent they are doing that. It still would be an impact if there's a guard around the propeller, but because it's not as sharp as the propeller, I'm assuming it would do less damage if a propeller was covered by a guard, which for those of you that don't know, the boat propeller, the spinning part, it's got like a literal cage that goes over it. It's not required. Really very few people use them, and it could have at least moderately helpful impact to reduce impacts on manatees and wildlife, in my opinion, but I'm no expert on it, David.
Hi, Jessica. Can I respond to that as well? So I'm Beth Brady. I'm sorry, I had some technical issues which didn't allow me to join the meeting, excuse me, when I wanted to. But the prop guards, effectively, from what we know, if they are put around the props, they can technically be seen as another thing to hit and hurt the manatee. So they're good if you use them and you properly use them and you go slow and observe manatee no wake zones and speed zones. But if you're moving in fast waters and you hit a manatee, it's another blunt force that could potentially impact the animal and kill the animal.
And just from like a recreational boater standpoint, I'm not sure how receptive or willing recreational boaters would be to having one more thing to take care of on their boat, because like boats and taking care of your engine is like a constant maintenance, and so adding one other thing could kind of dissuade them altogether from being willing to participate in this. The only location really that I know where people are kind of receptive to this boat propeller guards is really like up in kind of like the Big Bend of Florida, where there's a lot of oyster beds, which can like really destroy your prop.
The other thing I understood from prop guards is recreational boaters are concerned about increased drag or performance when they put them onto their props as well.
Can I add one more thing? This is Krista again. Related to that point, we have a lot of recreational boaters that aren't Florida residents that come in and rent a boat for recreational uses. That would be another audience that you would have to catch, where it's not their boat. They may not be doing the upkeep, and they may be even less aware of a lot of the regulations or best practices when they're here doing that.
Yeah, I think the boat rentals are a subset of recreational boaters. That certainly would be a high priority target for manatee education. Oh, Laura, you had a question? Oh, it's the same thing. Yeah, in what we've been talking about, I think we're saying both boat owners and boat operators, so people who are just renting a boat and may not own it. Any other questions about either the target audiences or some of the questions we're trying to answer? Any recommendations?
Jessica, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the seagrass losses that we're seeing, and maybe you said this and I missed it, is there a clear number one cause that are we saying for sure it's the nutrients? Is it the combination of things?
It's definitely a combination of things. There's a huge amount of nutrient pollution. The nutrient pollution is leading to harmful algal blooms. There's also a lack of tidal circulation because of the causeways that the land bridges that stop tidal circulation. So it's definitely many causes leading to these seagrass losses, and it's impossible at this point to like point to one specific thing.
Okay, no, I'm just thinking of like the coastal residents and kind of building that connection and envisioning them being like, I can't contribute to this, or whatever. But
yeah, to my mind, the role that the actions that they could change that would improve the situation are reducing fertilizer, putting living shorelines in place, making sure there's a large buffer between their like yard that they water or fertilize and the actual waterway. So I think there's a lot of small things that they can do to improve the situation, and if those actions are taken up on a broad scale, then we've got some movement forward. We're also interested in seeing, are they supportive of increased wastewater treatment, for example, that would cost taxpayer money to do something like that. So are they interested in spending money that improves the plight of a threatened species or the environment in general? Or is that not something they see as a valid use of their funds? Those are also higher level questions that we're trying to get at too. I just noticed there's a typo in Paige's email address. There's only one in there. She's not able to be here today, but she's with the National Wildlife Foundation. Beth, did you introduce yourself? I know you spoke up.
Not well. So I'm
Okay.
Dr. Beth Brady. I work at Save the Manatee Club. I'm also very interested in this as well and has conducted polls and surveys and analyzed some of the data. So I can also assist with that. So if someone is interested, I can also help significantly with that as well. So no one feels overwhelmed, but it would be great to have a social scientist on board as well.
Well, I will just ask for a pulse check then on some of the framework and the desired outputs. In the opinion of you as professionals here, especially social scientists, do you see both these outputs and the framework as a good way to move forward? Do you have feedback on that, suggestions?
So, may I ask a question?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of the human behavior, so what the behavior that you want to change is would involve the boat usage, using the boat. Is that correct?
That is potentially one of them, yeah.
So you want to use some type of message, persuasive message to appeal to or change that aspect of behavior. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations from that, Todd?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it because that's, I do human behavior, and so persuasive messaging is something I'm familiar with, and so I'm just trying to, rationalize how one would approach this and what would be the best messaging campaign. It could be anything from, the color of what you're saying to, the type of message framing.
Right.
Some of our thoughts were to potentially design the survey, see what people looked at and what they would most respond to as in form of informational message, and then maybe kind of guide our outreach efforts and what we do based upon that potentially. And maybe that's where the persuasive messaging could come in based on how people respond to the surveys. That's one of our ideas or thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I hate to interrupt here because I think this is an interesting conversation, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the next speaker. I do think this is a very worthwhile project. I'm personally interested in it. And if there's other thoughts and questions, you have the contact information. And maybe the 4 people who are involved in this can put their contact email address in the chat, just in case people missed it. But next is David Himmelgreen talking about the USF Center for Advancement of Food Security and Healthy Communities.
Good morning, everyone. I did send my my presentation to Blake, and so I think it's Blake. Thank you for advancing the slides. So I want to talk a little bit about the center. We haven't been around for that long, but myself and colleagues and students have been doing research in the area of food security and health for a long time now. So I think the connection here too, and one thing I'd like feedback on is that some of the work we're doing is with the local food system. So I think there's that connection with what you all are doing, and maybe that's something we can discuss after the presentation. So before I get into the specifics about the center, I just want to provide some definitions and some data. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Right. So what is food insecurity? It's a term that's thrown around a lot now. We see it in the scientific literature. We see it splashed across the media. I know when I first got into this business, this was in the mid 90s, it was a term that most people were unfamiliar with. And there's still some confusion to exactly what food insecurity or food security means. So I have two definitions, partial definitions, one from the USDA, and that's a social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. And then the FAO goes into a little bit more detail. It's a person is food insecure when they lack regular access to enough safe and nutritious food for normal growth and development and an active, healthy life. And there are a lot of other definitions, but I think these two capture it well. One thing I should mention too, in some of these definitions, there is mention of foods being socially acceptable and socially accessible. So if you're food secure, you ought not have to go dumpster diving or beg for food. So this gets built into a lot of the instruments to measure food insecurity and then to address it. I should also mention that where there's a lot of confusion, often people think that food insecurity means hunger. And it can be. If there's chronic hunger, you're definitely food insecure. But there's also a lot of food insecurity where hunger doesn't exist. And it really is an issue of quality of diet. Often it's associated with overnutrition. So in countries like the US and some other industrialized countries where you find food insecurity, often while there is some hunger, the bigger problem is really just a very unbalanced diet that is skewed towards energy-dense foods. So often you see food insecurity being associated with obesity and diet-related chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes. Next slide, please. Right. So there are 4 dimensions of food security that are, I think, pretty much recognized across the board. First, there's this idea of availability. Is that safe, nutritious, socially acceptable food readily available? Right? So if it's not available, if you're living in a place where there's famine, you're definitely food insecure. The second dimension is access. So the food may be available, but people don't have sufficient resources to get this food. And it could be money, but it also could be resources to produce their own food, be it through agriculture or fishing or whatever it may be. And then the third dimension is utilization. And this is both the knowledge and resources and sanitary conditions to prepare and distribute food that, again, is generally safe and nutritious. And if there's any instability in any of these 3 dimensions, that could lead to food insecurity. So a lot of what we look at when we talk to people is, one, about availability, access, and utilization. And then looking at these 3 dimensions to see if they're in balance. Next slide. So here's some data on food security, food insecurity in the U.S. The government, the federal government, started measuring food insecurity back in the mid 90s, and there was all kinds of debates about what it means and how do you measure it. And this is where social scientists had an important role to play. So for example, they used to, there was this debate on whether to use the word hunger in asking about food insecurity. And some of this was political too. So in the early 2000s, they decided to take out the word hunger when they report these national data. And I won't go into the deep, in depth about, some of the politics behind that, but there was some science as well. So, as a nation to. Food insecurity dates back a very long time, and you know, beginning in the and even before then, but during the Great Depression, there was increasing recognition that this was an issue. And then in 1968, there was a Hunger in America documentary that was on CBS, and it was presented by Walter Cronkite. I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he was an anchor at CBS News and pretty well respected. And that really raised a lot of awareness about hunger in the U.S. So a lot of the federal food assistance programs that came into play were developed during the early 1970s, actually beginning during the when President Nixon was in office. But the data we have starts from '98, and what you can see is often the rates of food insecurity increase or decrease along with how well the economy is doing. So during the Great Recession in 28 and 9, we see a very significant increase in both food insecurity in all households, and especially in households with children. And that peaked at about 21% in 2009. And you know, households with children, households with single mothers, and other vulnerable groups always have higher rates of food insecurity. The prevalence rate came down as the economy improved, and then it started to inch its way up again at the beginning of the pandemic. So you can see in 2020, it's at 10.5% for all households and almost 15% in households with children. These numbers are significant given the fact that the U.S. is a food-rich country, and it really comes down to, you know, problems of distribution and inequities. Next slide, please. So here's some of the most recent data. It actually comes from 2022. It was released in October of 2023. And what we see between 2021 and 2022 is there is a very significant increase in food insecurity. About 44 million people throughout the country. It goes from about 10.5% up to 12.8%. That's 17 million households. And that's up again over 10 million people, and 4.1 million more children are food insecure in 2022. And the reasons behind this are several. One is the high cost of living, and this is, as you all know, especially an issue in Florida with housing and property insurance and utilities, you name it, cost of food. And so it's a global problem as well. We also are seeing, as the federal assistance programs started to wind down, these were during the pandemic, and some of them have been eliminated, we see a very significant rise in food insecurity. And between 20 and 22, I don't have the most recent data from Florida. It's about 11.4% of Florida households are food insecure. And that does vary by county. So it's a little bit higher in Pinellas County and Hillsborough. I think they're both, until we see the newest data, a little bit above the national average. Now, what's interesting too, just a couple weeks ago, you may have heard that the government, the state government, decided to reject federal food assistance for summer child hunger programs, which was a significant amount of money, and that is a big problem. You know, often kids will get free breakfast, free or reduced lunch while they're in school. With summer, that those 3 months or so during the summer, a lot of kids really become food insecure, and some of them go hungry. Yet the state government really is reluctant to accept the funding from the federal government. And the reasoning is that there are a lot of requirements. These are the ones they state in terms of reporting and state contributions. Nonetheless, these are significant programs, and they do help to reduce food insecurity. So that's some background information. Next slide, please. So we do know, and this is an area that I've been doing work in for a long time, that food insecurity is tied both to physical and mental health. When we're talking about, you know, in some countries, the issue often is undernutrition, and infectious disease is associated with food insecurity. We don't see much of that in the U.S. The bigger issues, as I mentioned before, are the chronic diet-related diseases. You know, type 2 diabetes and hypertension, those are the biggies, followed by cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and cancer. And then there's this vicious cycle between both physical and mental health. So a lot of research, emerging research, showing this bidirectional relationship between these physical health problems, depression, anxiety, stress, substance abuse, eating disorders, and PTSD. So when we look at this, it's not only focusing on the physical conditions, but also looking at mental health. And there have even been studies looking at the impact of children who live in food insecure households, whose parents are experiencing stress, anxiety, and depression, and how that has a kind of knockoff effect on the kids themselves. Next slide. So a little bit about the center. As I said before, I've been doing research on food insecurity, food security, and health, going back to the mid-90s when this was a new term, new concept. And then in about 2013, I started working with Feeding Tampa Bay, which is the major food bank that provides food assistance to 10 counties in Tampa Bay. And in 2015-16, USF and Feeding Tampa Bay signed an MOU to work together on the problem. And then in 2020, our center is opened, and in 2021, it was recognized by the University Board of Governors as a statewide center, which we're beginning to do more work outside of the region, but mostly we are working with partners in Tampa Bay still. We've done work with Feeding America National, and we're learning a lot from them. So while Feeding Tampa Bay is our primary community partner, we work with a lot of other organizations. And one thing that we're finding is there are a lot of organizations, agencies that provide various services, direct food assistance in the form of food pantries, but also other programming like, enrolling people into SNAP for food assistance, or even programs that are popping up now like jobs training programs. So Feeding Tampa Bay is doing a lot of that now. These agencies do come for us to help write grants, to do program evaluations, and to design programs. And a lot of them are, even the larger ones, don't have the capacity to do research, to do social science research. So this, again, is an area that's ripe for social scientists, I believe, to become involved with. Next slide. So this is our mission, to transform the conversation about food insecurity using research, education, and transformational programs to facilitate social equity that results in healthier communities in Tampa Bay and beyond. And some of our colleagues do work in other parts of the U.S., but also internationally. Next slide. So our goals are, we mostly do research and program evaluation at this time. Again, as I said before, we assist agencies with program development and evaluation, and we design our own research studies, and we also work with these organizations when they're interested in a research question. Another goal is raising awareness about food insecurity. There is still the stereotype of what it means to be food insecure, and we're trying to deconstruct that. It's not just the person who is living on the streets or someone who's living in poverty. In fact, there is a growing number of households, individuals who live above poverty line, who are what would be considered middle class, who are experiencing food insecurity. And in 2019, the United Way did a study of what they call ALICE households. These are asset limited, income constrained households, but employed. So these are folks who own their own homes, who are renting condos, who have one or more household providers who are working. And they found, United Way in 2019 found that 42% of households in Pinellas County were ALICE households. And you hear people talking a lot now about how do you make ends meet, and often the first thing that is compromised is food. People buy less expensive food, and often that less expensive food is energy dense and not particularly nutritious. We also work with organizations to develop action plans and policy statements. There's some typos there. I apologize for that. And one of the big things is we are training quite a few students, to do research and to advocate for food security. So those are our main goals. Next slide. So predating the establishment of the center, and this is since about 2016, we've conducted more than 20 projects with community partners. We've involved 35 students, and I think that's even a little bit more now with a new project we just started. Predominantly graduate students, including students in anthropology, but also public health, environmental engineering, sociology, medicine. So it's really nice because it's becoming very interdisciplinary, which I think we all realize is critically important. We've secured grants and contracts from a variety of funders, including the USDA, Humana, the health insurance provider. Believe it or not, quite a few health insurance providers are in this game now because they realize it's a preventive measure, and they're also looking at it from the bottom line. It's a lot less expensive to ensure that someone or a household is food secure rather than someone who has a chronic disease and needs to go on high cost meds or turns up at the ER because of a diabetic coma. So the health insurance providers are Humana, Blue Cross, Florida, and others are providing funding. We've secured funding from the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Feeding Tampa Bay, and we're currently working with Hillsborough County on a food systems value assessment. Out of this, again, the training part is really important. Theses and dissertations for students, undergraduate internships, publications. We submit articles. Often our students are the co-authors, if not lead authors, and they get these articles reviewed and hopefully published, and that's good for resume building and for when they go out on the job market. And of course, most importantly, they learn how to do research and disseminate knowledge. Next slide. Right. So these are some examples of projects. One of the biggies right now is it's really taking off and is advocated by Feeding America National, which kind of has the 200 food banks as affiliates throughout the country, is food prescription programs or food as medicine programs. So we've done some of these food RX evaluations, and we just published a paper, a really interesting one, was a food RX program that was run by a healthcare clinic and Feeding Tampa Bay that started during the pandemic. So there were all kinds of challenges with that. But some of the key findings that we found was that there was a pretty strong association between food redemption rate. So people would go into the clinic, they'd screen for food insecurity, and if they were food insecure, they were offered the opportunity to participate in the Food RX program. They were given, they could use the on-site food pantry, and they were given food vouchers. And they could redeem these food vouchers at a Feeding Tampa Bay program called Groceries on the Go. And these would be vans that would go to different neighborhoods throughout the week, and people could go and pick up the food. Now, the good news was that the food redemption rate was associated with some improvements in health management, in disease management, like type 2 diabetes. There was also a decrease, for example, among patients with type 2 diabetes, a decrease in hemoglobin A1C, blood sugar. So the more they redeemed, the more likely we would see this reduction. We also saw a slight decrease in blood pressure. One of the problems that we're confronted with is that, early on people would participate and they would redeem food, and then there was a relatively rapid drop-off. Some people dropped out of the program, but some people would then redeem food less and less. So the second year of the program, there was a food delivery program that was piloted, and we looked at that too. So I'll just mention the last one too, the one we're doing with Hillsborough Homegrown, because I think that's the one that may be more closely directed with some of the things you all are looking at. This is, we're working with the county now. It's a 2-year program. And what the county did is hire local residents, including farmers and others, to interview key stakeholders in the local food system to kind of figure out all the connections in the food system and what these stakeholders want to do in terms of programming and education and building the local food system. So what we did is we trained these residents who went out and did these interviews, and we conducted, I think there were 120 interviews done over the last year, and about 600 surveys as well. And we just we're writing that up right now. The whole idea is to come up with a strategic plan to build the local food system, so there's more local food production, better distribution of that food, improved access to that food. So that's quite interesting. The county seems to be really committed to this. Next slide. All right, the last program is one also that I think I want to just highlight because it's tied more to what I think you might be interested in. This is a USDA funded project. It's called the 15th Street Farm Nutrition Education Program. And we're basically partnering with an urban farm in downtown St. Pete, which is run by a person by the name of Emmanuel Roux, who is a farmer. He's been in the restaurant business, and he has this very small, plot of land in downtown St. Pete. And he brings groups out to the farm and talks about regenerative agriculture. And then, so this program involves people who come to the farm, that includes kids, and we also go to working with 6 schools. So we go out to the schools, we have these instructors that go out to the school, and they talk about growing food. And some of these schools have their own gardens, and we have some funding to actually build up or restore these gardens, because some of them have kind of, it's very hard to get both human resources and funding to sustain these school gardens. We're working mostly with kids, primary, middle school kids, some high schoolers, and the curriculum focuses on healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy communities. So there is this connection of, for example, you need to have good soil, plant the right things, and then encourage people to eat that fresh produce. So we talk about everything from the microbiome to organic farming to healthy eating. And it's been fairly successful over the last year. We're doing a program evaluation, and again, we're renovating some of the school gardens, and we're looking towards sustainability. My understanding is the 15th Street Farm just received a grant from Healthy St. Pete that will allow them to build on this program, which ends at the end of 2024. So I'm going to end with just a short video about the 15th Street Farm program. Hopefully it'll work, and you'll get an idea. No volume, though. Okay. Well, sorry about there not being any audio, but if you click that link and you're interested in hearing what the kids have to say, it's really enlightening and heartwarming. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left for any quick question. If there's no question, I think this is very, very meaningful and important work you're doing there, David. So I'm sure people can contact you if they have further questions.
I can ask one, and it's kind of related to. So, if folks want to answer this question, I think it'd be interesting to get people's sort of feedback on what they think might be the most successful strategy moving forward. But yeah, so thinking about all of this and really thinking about, how do we scale some of these sort of programs? So at least from the TVEP perspective, thinking about the value of green infrastructure, green spaces, and so these gardens, whether it's in schools or communities, could help us address a lot of stormwater pollution issues and things like that. But I was just wondering kind of like what's the scalability of gardens, whether it's in schools or communities, and is it just is it so expensive that it is really hard and it's kind of opportunistic where it can go, or is this something that could actually get kind of taken up more broadly?
Yeah, well, I think it is. There are some places, for example, in New York City, where there's they're having quite a big bit of success with both community and school gardens and other places as well. I think there really one of the issues we have is the need to raise awareness about why this is beneficial to the larger community, and then getting the resources. Especially one of the issues, and I'll just say this quickly, one of the issues with community gardens, my understanding is that often volunteers come and go, and they have a limited amount of time to work these gardens. And it's often the folks who are most vulnerable who have the least amount of time because they're working, 2 or more jobs sometimes. So how do we make it more accessible to that population who is more likely to be food insecure?
Can I ask one quick question too? David, you mentioned being interdisciplinary, which is important to a lot of this work, but are there collaborators outside of USF that you're working with on many of these projects?
Yeah, well, I mean, most of our partners are outside of USF, and a lot of what we do is, at least in our field, is community participatory. So we create advisory groups or boards and have community residents, people who are part of both the research, evaluation, design, and who are involved with it.
All right. Thanks for that presentation, David. Next up is Christian Wells, who's going to talk to us about, that sounds exciting, reanimating zombie stormwater ponds through community co-design of novel bioinfiltration systems. Very short title.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to share your screen. Perfect.
Hey, I did it. Oh my gosh, this never happens. All right. So good morning. My name is Christian Wells. I'm an environmental anthropologist at the University of South Florida. Actually, David Hilmagreen is my colleague. He's located down a couple stairs. And today I want to talk a little bit about zombie ponds, my favorite topic. I have been working with a number of communities in the Tampa Bay area on a really persistent problem, which is underfunctioning or non-functioning stormwater treatment ponds. And this turns out to be a really important issue for the Tampa Bay because stormwater treatment ponds are supposed to reduce the nutrient load that would otherwise make its way into the Hillsborough River and ultimately make its way into the bay. But we find that a lot of stormwater treatment ponds are undergoing increasing episodes of flooding because of a warming and a changing climate. And this is leading to a lot of problems with functionality of the stormwater ponds. And so we're working with communities to figure out new and interesting ways that would allow us to improve the functionality of stormwater ponds and also turn them from kind of eyesores into community assets. So essentially turning stormwater treatment pond facilities into opportunities for passive recreation in sort of a context-sensitive way that communities are interested in. So today I'm going to talk about one successful project that we did over the years and then our current project, both of which were funded by the EPA. And these, by the way, these are often referred to as zombie ponds because they are alive, stormwater ponds, but they're dead. They're not functioning. So they have this terrible nickname of zombie ponds. Before I start, just by background, I direct a center at USF called the Center for Brownfields Research and Redevelopment, where we work with faculty and students, mostly from environmental engineering and public health and social sciences, on a range of outcome-driven kind of research in the Tampa Bay area that deals with environmental contamination of water and soil, land use legacies. Really, environmental justice has become really important because a lot of contaminated soil and water happen to be in underserved communities or minority communities. And then we work a lot on sustainable and equitable development. So what do you do after you conduct environmental assessment and cleanup? How do you redevelop in a sustainable and equitable way? So that's what we really have focused on at USF. And we have three sort of legs of the stool, as it were, research, redevelopment, and education. Our research has resulted in the creation of a free and easy to use online GIS tool called the Florida Brownfields Redevelopment Atlas. This takes everything that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has and overlays it with all of the information that the Environmental Protection Agency has, American Community Survey, a lot of different social science and health data sets from Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and a lot of local information, a lot of LIDAR coverage, aerial imagery, that sort of thing. So you can really zoom in at the census block group level, the neighborhood level, and start to see changes over time in terms of development kinds of issues around the Tampa Bay area. So I think it's a tool that might be really useful for those doing work around the Tampa Bay. We also do a lot with redevelopment, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. And then we've increasingly gotten into workforce development. We have a number of training programs that we run with the CDC of Tampa on environmental workforce development and training. And we've recently started actually using stormwater ponds as outdoor classrooms. So we're starting to use those ponds to teach practitioners about water sampling and water management and that sort of thing. But Most of the work we do focuses right now on the university area community and on East Tampa, so North and East Tampa, and today I'm going to focus on the university area community. For those of you not familiar with it, this is the area that sort of partially surrounds the Tampa campus of USF, and it looks like it's all interconnected with the city of Tampa, but in fact it's unincorporated Hillsborough County. Everything north from north of Fowler Avenue, about 100 feet off north of Fowler Avenue, is unincorporated county. And this is a neighborhood that has been disadvantaged for quite a number of years. It received large influx of people in the 1960s and 70s during housing demolition in the urban core of Tampa, and a lot of people migrated up to this area to live. It's also an area with, in the 60s, a lot of industry migrated up to this area because it's just outside of city boundaries. There was a movement of industry from downtown and downtown renewal in the 60s and 70s. And so you see a lot of industries that produce hazardous wastes and end up with brownfields and polluted land and water in this area. There are very high residential densities, a lot of renters. I think at our last count, there's 92% of the population are renters. And so this makes it somewhat challenging sometimes for community engagement, where you have people that might only be staying in this community for a short period of time before they move out and someone else comes in. So community engagement is important but difficult to do. And notably, there's a lack of critical infrastructures. Because this is the county, there has typically in the past been less investment than in adjacent neighborhoods that are within the city limits. So for example, if you go down certain streets in the university area community, you'll see that they're unpaved. There are no sidewalks. There are a lack of street lights. There are just a lot of infrastructures that are missing in this community. Also in this community, as you'll see, there are a lot of low-lying areas, and so there are a lot of stormwater treatment ponds. We started working with our partners, the University Area CDC. That stands for Community Development Corporation, not Centers for Disease Control. We started working with them back in 2015 on some of the stormwater pond redevelopment issues through grants funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. And if you're at all familiar with the Harvest Hope Park and Pond redevelopment area, that's been our primary target of redevelopment for a number of years. We conducted environmental inventory, economic market analysis, rapid health and social impact assessments, a lot of community outreach and interviews and strategic communications and marketing. My favorite activity on this project was a charrette with elementary school children, where we asked them to design the amenities for the playground. And they sort of used crayons and they drew it out. And they wanted to see ponies, and they wanted to see waterfalls and other things that we couldn't quite give them. But we worked with a national nonprofit organization called Kaboom that donates materials and supplies and equipment to build parks in underserved communities. And so we had community residents come out one day and we all worked together to build this playground. It was really wonderful. Today, the old neglected stormwater pond is now a really vibrant park where there is the playground that was designed by kids. There are outdoor fitness stations. Next month, they're about to break ground on a splash pad because kids really wanted that water. There's a community garden with 35 raised beds. There's a multi-purpose sports field, walking trail, and most recently the stormwater pond was cleaned up and turned into a tilapia fish pond. So now people can come out and fish. So that was sort of a successful pond redevelopment that we did working with the community. Now we're all this information, I should note, is available on our website at uacleanup.com, and you can go and see our redevelopment plan. You can see all of those assessments and tools that we used. All of the reports that were generated are all available on uacleanup.com. Our more recent pond redevelopment is called Aaron's Pond, and that is a formal stormwater treatment facility operated by the county, Hillsborough County, and it's located between Nebraska and Bruceby Downs and between Fowler and Fletcher, sort of right in the middle, back by kind of near where the big bus station is in North Tampa. And we received a grant from the EPA's Gulf of Mexico research program to try to do what we could, not just to clean up the pond and turn it into some recreational area, but also to improve the functioning of the pond, particularly through this notion of bioinfiltration or bioremediation. So when we started working with residents and talking with residents, they had quite a range of opinions about the pond itself. One person told us about all of the trash that's constantly gathers there on the side and in the water. And they said, I would add trash cans and seating so this area can get cleaned up and people can relax there. Somebody else told us that this pond is nasty and dirty year round. It's not safe for humans or animals. Another person that lived in an apartment complex across the street from the pond told us that the water smells so bad when it's hot outside. They think the sun causes the smell to spread throughout the area. And then there are a number of individuals, unsheltered individuals that turn the north and east side of the pond into their homes. So there are encampments in that area, and residents say that the people that live that way in the fence, so I stay away from that area. So a lot of different people have different perceptions of the pond and interactions with the pond in really different ways. This gives you a sense of where the pond is in terms of our digital elevation model, and you can see that it's in one of the lowest spots within the area. So it does receive a lot of flooding, increasing flooding. And if you look at land use in the area, you'll see that the area is surrounded by, I don't know if you can see my, yeah, you can see my pointer a little bit. The area is surrounded by multifamily residential complexes, light industry, and commercial. And historically, some of that light industry involved the formation of brownfields, particularly contamination by lead and arsenic. So when we talk about flooding into the stormwater treatment pond, we also have to be concerned with contaminants such as heavy metals. There are, in terms of the water, the stormwater that comes in and goes out of the pond, there are a number of weirs and conduits. 16 are directly linked to the pond. And half of those links carry water away from the pond and toward another pond that's closer to the old University Mall area. 2 major conduits bring water directly into the pond. We've been working with a best management practices model called TRAINS that's available from the University of Central Florida to look at what the annual loading is for total nitrogen and total phosphorus, what the loading looks like before the stormwater reaches the pond, after treatment, so when the stormwater is leaving the pond, and then what those reductions are naturally from the functioning of the stormwater infrastructure. And you can see that the reduction is about 100 kilograms per year for total nitrogen and about 20 grams per year for total phosphorus. So this tells us that there's still room for improvement in removing nutrients before it makes its way into the bay. And that's what the interest is in creating bioinfiltration systems that will sort of interrupt stormwater before it gets into the pond and help to clean it through the absorption of nutrients. So this is one of the intersections, the southwest intersection of where the pond is. The pond is in the upper right-hand corner. And a couple of years ago, the county came up with a plan for the location of what are called urban bioswales, or some people know it colloquially as rain gardens. And so they suggested putting a number of rain gardens on the corner that might interrupt some of the flooding and some of the stormwater that enters the pond. And so they had a particular design for this that we're looking into. And we've started working now with residents to evaluate the goodness of fit of this pond for how people use the pond and perceive of the pond. So we've been working at with the university area, CDC, we've been tabling at a number of events, holding community conversations, and going door to door at the apartment complexes, doing some rapid ethnographic assessments to try to understand how people use the pond, whether or not rain gardens would be appropriate for this area, whether or not they would quickly become contaminated with trash, what people's local experiences are with that particular intersection and flooding to see if rain gardens are even an appropriate technology. And through our work at Harvest Hope Park, we've developed a model of community engagement when it comes to engineering kinds of redevelopment projects that tries to increase equitability or participation. in the co-design of these projects, also to increase community engagement, all the while balancing what we call authoritative knowledge or expert knowledge from engineers and local knowledge, or the knowledge that residents have. And we've come up with 4 different modes of engagement that residents can participate in to contribute toward co-design. And you can see those rectangles in the middle of the graph represent those different modes of engagement. Everything from simple presence and communication to capacity building, university relationships, and then finally, the highest mode of participation would be participatory research that Dr. Himmelgreen was talking about. So we're experimenting with these different levels and modes of engagement right now to try to find the right mix of strategies to work with residents for the co-design. So working with residents and engineers, this is one of the bioremediation systems that we're experimenting with, just a schematic of that system. So water will come into one of the systems that's full on the bottom of biochar that we're sourcing commercially from an organization, I think it's called Sunshine Organics up in Jacksonville. And then that biochar, so this is, charcoal, to keep it from floating in the tank, we add a proprietary mix of a stormwater matrix called Storm Mix, and this comes from Oldcastle Engineering, and that kind of holds the biochar down. So the water passes through these different filtration media and passes out in and leaves the tank in what we call the free drainage facility on the left. On the right, we're also experimenting with something called elevated drainage, where water will come down and will pool in the bottom of the tank and then be pushed out by new water that comes in. So we're looking at a couple of different strategies, and we're pilot testing these on the USF campus at the USF Botanical Gardens. If you're familiar with the Botanical Gardens, we have a lake there called Lake Benke, and the big tub over there on the left is where we bring in lake water. We add some chemicals to it to simulate stormwater, and then we pump it into the 2 different bioremediation systems, and then we start to measure the total inorganic nitrogen or phosphorus in those to look at how well those kinds of systems remediate the effluent, the stormwater effluent. And you can see in this case, untreated water has 1.3 milligrams per liter of total nitrogen, and after it passes through the system, there's a reduction of about 0.4 milligrams per liter in either system. It looks like right now that both systems, either the free drainage or elevated drainage, are working at about the same scope. So we're also working with EPA's stormwater management modeling system to start to model for the Aaron's Pond what nitrogen and phosphorus mass loadings would look like without the bioinfiltration versus with the bioinfiltration, and see how much nitrogen and phosphorus can be absorbed and removed from these systems. We're also experimenting with a couple of other bioremediation systems. One is the bioswale or the rain garden that the county has proposed, and another is floating treatment wetlands, where you choose certain species of plants that are then located in and around the sides of stormwater treatment ponds, and the root systems act in a way to absorb and uptake some of the nitrogen and phosphorus. And so we're hoping with these sort of a mix of technologies between the bioinfiltration system, the bioswales, and the floating treatment wetlands, we can really reduce the nutrient loads that are coming out of the stormwater pond and making their ways into the Tampa Bay. Finally, we just started with the National Science Foundation to begin to evaluate the effects of on-site wastewater treatment at residential areas surrounding the ponds. This is, again, unincorporated county, and a lot of the residential areas use septic systems. And many of those septic systems are aging, they're broken, they're not maintained very well, or what we find a lot of times is they're undersized for the number of people in the home. And so it leads to a lot of poorly treated wastewater effluent that makes its way into the stormwater pond. And so we're looking particularly at the effects of E. coli and total coliform. We have some other colleagues that are looking at some other kinds of bacteria that make their way in. So we'll soon be adding not just nutrients and heavy metals to the study, but also bacteria and sort of biological contaminants. I'm about ready to finish, don't worry. And I just want to point out a couple of really useful manuals that folks on this call might be interested in. The Centers for Disease Control, ATSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, that's a mouthful. They put out this really awesome compendium called Creating Healthy Communities. And there are lots of case studies on how to engage with community residents about revitalizing communities. We have anthropologists that are colleagues at the EPA and Office of Research and Development, and they put out these two great manuals, How to Get to Know Communities and Cultures, and more recently, Building Trust and Relationships in Community Cleanup and Revitalization. And they provide really step-by-step guides about how to engage communities. And then most recently, we edited an issue of the Journal of Environmental Management that provides a lot of case studies using that, that model of different modes of engagement. So with that, I will say thank you very much. My contact info is below, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hey, Christian, I'm curious, what was the community group you mentioned? Kaboo?
For the
just-
playground, the group is called Kaboom, and they provide up to $200,000 in materials and supplies for building playgrounds in underserved communities. I think Tampa has 3 or 4 Kaboom playgrounds. The nonprofit that works with Kaboom has to come up with the human power to build the playground. So you have to get community residents involved, but then Kaboom will show up with everything and help people build these playgrounds. It's a really wonderful organization.
Christian, I have one question related to sort of long-term follow-up after these projects are done, because I believe that we have a park and splash pad here that's built on a brownfield in Gainesville, and it's been there for many years. And it seems like every couple of years there's some additional, it's like new residents that aren't sure about the safety related to having a park on top of a brownfield, and like the conversation about that is spurred again. So is there, it sounds like there's community engagement and involvement while these projects are being planned or are first implemented, but do you have to go back maybe 5 or 10 years later sometimes and have those conversations all over again, or do you kind of monitor that sentiment over time?
Yeah, in the cases that I've worked with that involve brownfields adjacent to what would later become a park, those involved actual cleanup versus engineering controls installed to separate people from the brownfield. So we have not had those kind of continual community concerns with the use of engineering controls. But I suspect that sort of long-term engagement with communities is a must through any kind of redevelopment project. Yeah, that's a very good question moving forward. How do you continue to inform communities when brownfields are not fully remediated, but only partially remediated? Yeah, that's a great.
And I'm thinking it's especially useful in a state like Florida, where we're constantly having new residents coming in. Yeah.
But it's a learning opportunity.
What was the total cost of your project, Christian?
The current project we're on with Aaron's Pond, that is $1.5 million from EPA. And then we're looking for additional contributions in the private sector to help us build the infrastructure that's needed for the sort of passive recreational amenities. And then we have commercial and industry partners, Old Castle Infrastructure and some other engineering firms that are actually donating the components for the infrastructure.
The T-Roof grant that Blake mentioned at the beginning, the Environmental Restoration Fund, I think this would be a really good project to use those funds for. It's a very small grant relatively, like the highest level of funding is usually $250,000 per project, and it does require a match. But if you're seeking additional funding, that could be an avenue for you.
Yeah, I heard about that and I got really excited because we're working with Mary Lusk from University of Florida, and she is in charge of community education and coming up with kiosks and displays and ways to educate people about reducing nutrients in stormwater ponds. I think this would be so great for her.
We probably have a few more minutes left. If there's no other questions, we can move to our final presentation. Clearly, we're still also trying to figure out the right format, right? We probably packed too much in this 2-hour schedule today. And so I want to make sure that everybody gets the appropriate time. So if there's no other questions, and just as a reminder, this will be the last item for today. So any discussion items or updates that you have, please email them to Blake and he will compile them and share them around. But with that being said, we're gonna end with, and I'm hoping I pronounce your name right, Weijia Wang, who's gonna talk about coupling natural and human models in the context of a lake ecosystem.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Unfortunately, I cannot share my screen, Black. Would you mind giving me the host, or let me share my screen?
You should have it now.
Okay, maybe I need to. Sorry about it. I still not seeing it here. Maybe I should go back and rejoin quickly if that works. I will take just 30 seconds.
I can also pull it up on my end and click through your slides for you if you want.
Yeah, it will be great. Yeah, if that works.
Yes.
Cool. Thanks, Black. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, hi everyone. Very nice to see you here. And if you don't know me, my name is Weijia Wang. I'm the assistant professor in the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida. And my specialization is in the valuation of ecosystem services and water policy. So today I'm actually going to talk about some research outputs we had with NSF funding, which focused on thinking about how we can connect economic models, social science models, and hydrology and other model, and around all the 6 disciplines together to thinking about modeling the coupled human nature systems. And we will talk about it in the context of freshwater lakes. We have a lot of freshwater lakes in Florida, and I think that's one of the reasons I moved to Florida, and that's the things which attract people to go to Florida, because we can enjoy so much activities along the lake, such as kayaking. And if you see the next slides, we can swimming, we can have a lot of water related activities. And also we have a lot different kinds of water birds. We have different species which is living relying on the ecosystem services that the lakes provided. But unfortunately, if you see the next slide I'm providing, and I think that's the things we're seeing in Florida, and everyone knows about this as algae blooms or algae blooms in freshwater lakes. It's green and dirty, and there's a lot of reasons contributing to that, and that of course it impacts our societies in terms of the social welfare and everything related. So the central question we're going to explore in this project, and actually in a lot of the research projects I'm developing right now, is let's think more broadly. Let's think about the interaction between the human system and the nature systems. How would those human activities affect the lakes we love? And also how would those lakes inspire people to act? And how can we make a conceptual framework for these two-way linkages? And then how could we modeling this? So in this project, we actually proposed a circle. We call it a coupled human nature system because it actually goes from the human systems to the nature systems and then go back to the human systems. So starting with the first thing, like in Florida especially, we use decisions every day. We see land use changes. We see different management decisions like the fertilizer usage, like different management decisions we're applying to our land, whether urban land or agricultural land. Those land use decisions and the management decisions will affect the water quality, along with the hydrological process, along with the precipitation, along with a lot of nature-based factors. And then those nitrates, they will leach to the lakes and will affect the water quality. And also don't forget that lakes also provided a lot of resources for water use. So the different land use decisions like migration will also affect the water quality. And all of them will affect the ecosystem services we received or the existence of ecosystem services. People can feel in ecosystem services, and also they have different values for different ecosystem services we are seeing. And those changes in ecosystem services will affect people's decisions. For example, if you see the lake change in your neighborhood, suppose you have a lake front the property and you see the lake water quality change. We've seen a lot of cases in the United States. People will form some associations like lake protection associations. We call these collective actions, which will help to change policies or at least raise awareness, make the behavior changes. And then those policies and the behavior changes will again affect the land use and the management decisions. So that's why we think this is a circle, and we should thinking about how to take into account those feedbacks using the modeling framework. So if you go see the next slide, and this is how we are going to modeling it. I'm not going to mention the details about this, but we have a conceptual framework and a paper which illustrates the detailed modeling we have. But basically what we advocate here is like social scientists, nature scientists, we should hold our hands together and we should pass the data from one discipline to another discipline. We should sit down and we should talk more about how we can work together. Is there anything we could do to think about better modeling both the human process and the natural process? So if you look at the next slide, this is the team we have. This is the team photo we had in the Lake Mendota watershed. And actually all the modeling results I'm talking about today is based on the Lake Mendota watershed in Wisconsin. Why? Why we choose this watershed and not Florida? The reason is I was in Wisconsin at the time, and also this is the most studied lake in the world. So we have a lot of data, and we know some scientists from UW-Madison who can support us with this research. But actually, since I'm moving to Florida, my passion and my interest was thinking about moving the models we already established, and then see how we can tailor it to different water bodies in Florida, especially thinking from the Tampa Bay. So, and for the next slide, you will see the different disciplines we coupled or integrated together. We have people who are from the biological system engineering. We have economists, we have hydrologists, we have limnologists, we have biogeochemists, we have ecologists, and also we have social scientists. So this is definitely a teamwork, and I think a good thing we have at Florida is we have those people, and all those people from different disciplines. They do care about the water quality issues, and also help to come up with some things to do with our water issues. So in the rest of my presentation, I will just use some we already find, and then we will talk about the implications and also how we can think about moving from Wisconsin to Florida. So the first part I'm going to talk about is about surface water pollution. So in the entire project, we didn't dig into the groundwater part. We're just thinking about surface water pollution. And also for us, we just focused on nutrient pollution. We know there are different other types of pollution, but similar to Florida, nutrient is a big issue in Wisconsin, and this is the leading types of pollution, which is caused by agricultural runoff from fertilizer, pesticides, or animal waste, and it will lead to harmful algae blooms. So the surface water pollution will have a lot of economic impacts in terms of commercial and recreational fishery, in terms of the housing market, and also in terms of drinking water safety. But in the results I'm going to present, we start with the housing market. The reason we do that because this is the things people do observe, and also it will raise the awareness, especially for lakefront homeowners. So if you go to the next slide, we already published these results and all the modeling framework in this paper. So if you have more interest, you can find this paper, and also I'm happy to send you the full test. But basically in this paper, we're talking about how we can coupling the limnology model with the economic models to think fully about the linkage from the nutrient loadings to the lakes, to the water qualities, and to the ecosystem services, and then to the economic impacts we have. So if you go to the next slide, the policy context is actually similar to Florida. We are talking about the TMDL, which I believe Tampa Bay also have this policy context. So in the US, if you're thinking about the water policy, the first thing which everyone will talk about is the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act made strict regulations to the point source pollutant, but unfortunately for non-point source water pollutions, they put those authorities to the state and to require the state to implement actions to reduce the total maximum daily loss for impaired waters. So Wisconsin has it, and also Tampa Bay also has it. But there is a gap when we're thinking about from the total maximum daily loss to the water qualities that will drive people's decisions. And if you go to next slide, I can show you gap. Next one. So for example, for the total maximum daily loss, they actually requires like what's the input, like for example, what's the nutrient loading changes they have for specific water bodies. But if you look at the economic literature and also a lot of the social science literature, if you're just talking about the percentage of nutrient loading changes, people don't have a good perception or don't have a good idea about it. But if you talk about water clarity, if you talk about the algae blooms and the frequencies of it, people will say, yes, I can observe that, and then this will impact our decisions. So that's why we want to work with limnologists to really transferring the policy targets to something people can observe, or people can feel, which then can drive their decisions. So for the entire framework we're going to talk about here is actually we let the limnologist build a general lake model for us, and then they have more than 300 variables they could model for the entire lake system, and then we let them vary about the nutrient loadings to the lake, and then tell us what's the water quality changes, and what's in terms of the Secchi depth readings, and also what would be the impact to the algae blooms, and we use the concentrations of chlorophyll A to measure it. I just look at the Tampa Bay water quality report card, and also I think chlorophyll A is used in the Tampa Bay report card. And then by doing this, we build a hedonic property value model, which I will explain a little bit later, to assess how would the water quality changes will affect the property prices changes. And remember that property prices change is an important part for the community, because especially for lakefront communities, property tax revenues is mainly based on the property prices. And then so the property prices changes will change the property tax revenues, which will impact the financial resources of the community, and also then will affect the community level policies. And those community level policies will potentially bring impacts to the design of the total maximum daily loads. So this is the framework we highlighted in this paper. And the next several slides, I'm just going to tell you some modeling details. And so we do this at the Lake Mendota watershed, as I mentioned, similar to a lot of lakes in Florida. It's a eutrophic lake, and they have algal blooms every summer. And we have data for that. But I'm actually very glad to find out Florida also have a good data to support this kind of modeling. And if you go to the next slide, and this is the water quality model the hydrologists building to us. Basically, you can think about the lakes as an ecosystem services. And what they do as an ecosystem, what they do is to change the input of the nutrient loadings. And we simulate 8 scenarios, trying to think about if things going better in different degree, what's the consequences? If things going bad, going worse in different degree, what's the consequences? And we're thinking about the changes in both the nitrogen and the phosphorus. And if you go to next, basically their model can, if we change the scenarios of nutrient loadings, how would it impacts the Saki depths and the surface chlorophyll A concentrations that people can notice, and then will impact people's decisions. So, and then we use these results in the prediction and coupled with the estimation we get from the hedonic model, and to highlight the impacts of potential policy changes. So if you go next, this is the idea of the hedonic property value model. Thinking about it, previously using a very clean lake, the water quality is good, and you own a lakefront properties, you pretty much enjoyed it. But unfortunately, after many years, or you can even thinking about it will just take some time, and then the water becomes green and dirty. And then people don't want to live here. Basically, they will move out. They will sell their properties because they cannot enjoy the amenity value and the recreational values they can get from the lake. So the housing price will going down. And of course, there are a lot of things that will affect the housing dynamics and the housing price. So that's why if you see the next slide, we basically build an economic model, and we control a lot of factors which will affect the housing prices using the econometrics method. And also we follow the best practice we have in the economic literature. And then we isolate the impact of water qualities and see first, how many properties will be impacted? And then second, see like what's the magnitude of the impact. And similar with the findings in a lot of literature, we find the largest impact or the significant impact is on lakefront properties. Although in some of the different water bodies, some of the second-row properties will be impacted. But in this study, we just focus on the impacts of lakefront. Even though you will see in the future slides, actually the economic impact is very large. So that's why we can go to the next one to see how the numbers looks like. Yes, just next one. See, here is the aggregated property value changes we calculated for different scenarios. And there are 2 things I want to highlight. The first thing is we find out for different water quality indicators, the economic impact will be different. And actually, the number differs a lot if you compare the number with Saki depths and the surface chlorophyll A. So that's why actually we need to think carefully about the ecological indicators we could we should highlight. And I think Black and I will have some conversation about it. We will further discuss it. But and there's the second thing I want to highlight. If you just compare the nutrient increase versus the nutrient decrease, and just the same percentage of changes, but the impact will be different. For eutrophic lake, improve the water quality will bring more economic impacts than increase nutrient. So it's better to protect our lakes right now than than do something in the future. And also, this is the aggregate property value change. And see if you go to the next one, we also calculated the tax revenue effects. This is annual effect because the property tax is collected annually. And then we calculated for different communities and for different scenarios. And those impacts will actually affect the provision of local services like education, like environmental protection, like others. So we hope to use these numbers to raise people's awareness. And also, in this study, we just focus on the lakefront properties, but we are hoping to do more for Florida by thinking about all the properties which is within us a different spatial extents, and then see how that varies. And this is the first paper I want to talk about. But the thing is, we're already seeing, if we just see the housing value and housing market impacts, the algal blooms and all the water quality is large. But if you go to next, what I want to see, this is just one dimension. Water quality policy or improving water quality can have other things which is actually beyond what we even think about, or beyond the water dimensions. So that's why I want to talk about my second paper, which is talking about what's the co-benefits of water quality policy. And before I jump into my results, I want to and by the way, in this paper, we build an integrated assessment model to examine all the linkages between land use and water quality and ecosystem services, and also the benefit cost analysis of water policies. So if you're interested, I can send you the whole paper. But if you go to the next slide, I want to start with some facts, which is surprising for me when I first read that, but also then when I think through that, I think it actually makes a lot of sense. So there's a paper in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, which they compared and contrasted all the benefit cost analysis for the environmental regulations in the US, including the surface water, which is the Clean Water Act, the drinking water, which is the Safe Drinking Water Act, the air pollution, the greenhouse gas, and others. And if you look at the number here, this is the benefit cost ratio. For all other regulations, the benefit is larger than the cost, because if the benefit cost ratio is larger than 1, which means the benefit is larger than the cost. But just for surface water, the benefit is actually lower than the cost, which when people see these results, a lot of people, especially from EPA and other federal agencies, they're thinking about why. What's the reasoning? How is that even be possible? And so let's actually drive the entire research agenda I have. So if you go to next slide, I will talk about why. The reason is based on the current valuation framework, or based on the current modeling framework we actually have a lot of categories of benefits which is hard to quantify or cannot transformed into the monetary values which can be incorporated in the current benefit cost analysis framework. I call it co-benefits because for water policies, they can impact a lot of dimensions, but this is not targeted and not quantified yet. So this include the health benefit, like nitrate leaching will affect the health. So that's why I'm developing a research project on this. There's existing values of those water bodies, like lakes, like others. Like we just like it. We want it to be exist. It's hard to see what values comes from. And in this paper, I just quantified one dimension, change the results. The dimension is like also the water quality policy will affect the greenhouse gas emissions. And we can quantify actually the economic impacts from the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And also there are other non-standard pollutants. They have economic benefits as well. So go to the next slide. I will tell you why water quality and the greenhouse gas are linked. So thinking about the agricultural production, fertilizer has been used a lot in the US. So as a side effect, the fertilizer use will create water quality issues like application through the nitrate leaching. But also don't forget that a side output of fertilizer use is nitrous oxide. Is nitrous oxide emissions, which actually is a greenhouse gas with high potential, with high global warming potential. So thinking about it, we have water quality policies which helps to control the eutrophications. And if you thinking about the linkage with human decisions, people follow those water quality policies, they will reduce their fertilizer usage. They were thinking about their agricultural production and management decisions, and also that will reduce the levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what we do in this paper. We actually quantified it. So if you go to the next slide, and we did a comparison about it. Oh, so first, why we want to consider this? Because we think if we're accounting for the co-benefits, can potentially reverse the decisions of benefit cost analysis. And also it will help us thinking about how to design what's the socially optimal level of nitrogen applications. So our results is in the next slide. And so the left part is the water benefit, the water quality benefit we quantified. So the x-axis is just different reduction scenario, but what we want you to see is actually the magnitude for the benefits of gas reductions and compared with the benefits of leaching reduction. And you will see that actually the co-benefits from greenhouse gas reductions is way larger than the water quality benefits. Why? If you go to the next slide, we will see why. First, we find out that the greenhouse gas benefits 20 times larger. The reason is the greenhouse gas reduction, the benefits happens at global scale because this is a global thing. But for water quality benefits, when we quantified, like I mentioned in my last paper, we just quantify some localized effects in a lot of literature. So basically, this is like a comparison of local benefits versus global benefits. And also we find out if we include those greenhouse gas emission benefit, it has a potential to reverse the benefit cost analysis we are seeing before. So what we want to say is like the benefits of the current water quality policy, especially for TMDL, is potentially underestimated. And of course, those co-benefits vary across years depending on the weather conditions. I feel like this is more important for Florida because we are seeing the changing weather conditions in the state. And also in Florida, we are also seeing the low BMP adoption rates. This makes me think about maybe we can leverage it, the carbon market we have, and to really think about how we can design a better policy framework to increase the adoption of BMP, to make real behavioral changes. So basically, that's what I want to talk about today, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts. And this is my email address. Feel free to email me at any time if you want.
Awesome. Thank you, Weixia. You know, Weisha and I have talked about a lot about this in other meetings, so she knows how interested I am in all of this. But I think that what you underscored there is really important to think about how, when we put the environment into, these balance sheets, into these types of cost analysis, and seeing that it can actually come up unfavorably, right? The benefits not outweighing the costs, but realizing that it's sort of just a product of putting a number on all of the different confluence of things. And so really diving into all those different types of benefits, and if we can put a price tag on them, or other ways that we can look at them, I think is really important, and really important for creating different messages for different audiences too. um, I am cognizant that we are out of time. For those uh, they're still here. If you want to do our last sort of poll here from our Mentimeter, you can do that to give Weisha feedback for her reporting on this presentation. Um, I'm happy to stay on here for folks that have questions for Weisha, questions for myself, or just want to continue the conversation. You're all welcome to stick around. We are going to have our next meeting May 22nd of this year. I'm going to send around, in addition to a recap of this meeting, as well as the recording for all those who couldn't attend live. We are going to ask for you all to give us your opinions on the types of meetings that you would like to have. If you like these types of, seminar meetings and want to see those continue, but also if you are interested in more interactive types of meetings, whether those are workshops, trainings in particular methods, or or other sort of tools that you might want to do, collaborative problem solving types of meetings, those sorts of things. We'd love to get your feedback on things that would be exciting for you to do. And so if everyone has to leave, feel free to leave. Thank you all so much for coming, and for all of our presenters. I love how interdisciplinary this was, and how it was sort of the focus of most of these conversations. So thank you to everyone who came and presented. And I'll go ahead and stop the recording now, but feel free to hop on and continue the discussions.